Just scrolling through my channel here, I've heard a lot of bookshelf speakers. I probably reviewed and heard more bookshelf speakers, stand mount speakers than floor standers. And I have to say, I don't think I've heard a better stand mount speakers than the TAD ME1s. So these TAD ME1 speakers are speakers that I used to sell while I used to work at the high-end retail store. Spoiler, I've never sold a single pair. It's kind of embarrassing. Anyhow, I feel like people don't know as much about the TAD speakers, and I feel like they need to know. These are some serious high-end speakers. They're about $13,000 and with the stand about $15,000 approximately. So that's not a small change by any means of a stretch. However, if any company, if any product deserves the $13,000 or $15,000 price tag, I think it is these TAD ME1 speakers. But I'm calling them the anti-high-end speakers. And there's a good reason for that. The reason is that a lot of high-end stuff have a lot of excuses. Let's take a look at the Toronto Audio Fest coverage that I made. If you haven't looked at it, I'll link in the description below. But you've seen a lot of speakers there, and there's some really high-end crazy stuff. Sometimes it sounds great, but sometimes it just sounds mediocre. In fact, a lot of the comments I get at shows is people coming up to me and saying, wow, I didn't imagine a $150,000 speaker sounding so mediocre. In fact, I prefer my $2,000 speakers in my own listening room. And that is the fact. The fact is that room is very important, gear matching is very important, and that is just a fact, it's reality. I say it's an excuse, but in reality, it's just a fact. It's not like these high-end manufacturers are making up excuses. The higher end you go, the more you have to pay attention to setup, amplification, and when you dial everything in, yes, it sounds magnificent, but it's much like when you're buying a pro camera or a pro car, where you need to have a skill set to actually use the technology properly to appreciate it. For example, if I didn't know how to color grade, this video would look like this. And so that is exactly what I'm talking about. But technology has allowed us nowadays to have cameras on our phone or even have a car that you really don't need a skill set and you just shoot and it looks like a pro did it. And that's exactly what the TAD ME1 speakers are. These are true high-end speakers, but the technology within these speakers allow it to be less finicky than even speakers that cost much less. For example, these speakers are less finicky with placement and amplification pairing in comparison to something like the Bucard S400 Mark II, which is known to be pretty good even in untreated rooms. In fact, I don't think I've ever heard the TAD ME1 speakers sound bad anywhere. Small room, untreated room, large rooms, medium room, you name it. I've heard it at many different rooms, and I've never heard the TAD ME1 speakers sound bad. So let's recap here a little bit. What makes these speakers sound so versatile and good at the same time? Well, first of all, it's using a dual concentric driver. They call it the CST, Coherent Source Transducer. And essentially what that is you have a metal dome, beryllium dome tweeter in the middle, and then you have a mid-woofer surrounding it. So you've seen this in like some KEF speakers and even Elac speakers before. So the beauty about dual concentric designs, and that goes the same for the KEF and the Elac speakers as well, a design like this allows for very good phase coherency. So what does that mean in practicality? Well, I found that they passed the TV test, meaning even if I have a large TV in the middle of the room, like most of us do in entertainment rooms, these speakers still have that phantom center dead on center. They don't seem to scatter like some other speakers do when there's a gigantic reflective surface in the middle of the room, but rather they focus just fine. And when you have no reflective surface between your speakers, it even focuses even more precisely and more sharply. But it still does give you perfect imaging, even with a TV or a rack or furniture in the middle of your speakers, like most of us do. And I think that is an important consideration because it actually fights real life situations. And when I compared the ME1 to some of the less expensive dual concentric designs like the KEF LS50 Meta or the Elac Unify Reference, I found that these ME1 speakers are just way more precise and more coherent, and they disappear better even with a reflective surface between the speakers. And in a treated room like mine, the ME1 does better not only with center imaging, but separation in the instruments and the overall cohesiveness and crowd control, meaning the music seems less crowded and everything is distinctively separated, with side imaging knowing exactly where the guitar is, for example, in relation to the vocals. Everything seems very well laid out in comparison to much less expensive options with similar technology. And in my room, by hands down, this speaker goes the lowest and is in comparison even to some floor standing speakers I've tested in my room. And there's two things at play here. One is the 6-inch woofer. And I know that's not a big size woofer, but this is a very heavy duty woofer with a fiber material that is commonly used in armor and bulletproof vest. Yes, you heard me right, bulletproof vest. And while that may seem excessive, it allows the woofer to be rigid and allow it to have lowest distortion possible while playing those low frequencies and really pressurizing your room. And at first glance, this speaker seems like it's not ported and a sealed design, but in fact, this is a slot ported design. In fact, it has 4 ports. So just wanted to give you guys a quick look here. So there is the panel, and then on the middle, there is a opening from the cabinet, and then there's a slot on the front on both sides. And there is a slot on the back as well, that here on both sides. So there's 4 slots on this speaker. TAD claims that this flared port technology allows it to fight the standing waves effectively inside the cabinet while also eliminating unwanted port noises that you might find in other speakers, which I find incredibly unique because I really haven't seen a slot ported design like this where there's front and back. I've never seen anything like it, period. But it works well. And I say these speakers work really well because even in my space, which is about a medium-sized room, I thought that the bass may be a little bit too boomy because of all the ports, but because of the port technology, perhaps, it doesn't get boomy whatsoever. It's pretty linear in terms of how it handles bass and pressurizes my room, and really satisfied with the texture and the quality as well. I've heard these speakers in smaller rooms and even closer to the wall in my space, and I haven't found them to be a concern in terms of bass loading in the room. The reason I have these speakers about 3-4 feet out of the room is because of the soundstage depth and not the bass. Just naturally because of physics, if I have these speakers about 3-4 feet out into the room, I just get more depth perception down in the middle, so it seems to stretch further. That's just physics, and there's nothing you can do about that. But the bass wasn't really the concern. I've never heard these speakers boomy or muddy up the room, even when it's close to the wall, like really close, like few inches close. Now, I have to be honest with you guys. In terms of sound quality alone, I don't think I have heard a better stand mount speaker. In fact, this speaker really competes with floor standers because it goes down to 30 Hertz almost flat in my room. It has the same bass presence, air movement. I would say maybe floor standers like Wilson Audios will have more air movement and dynamic swing. But I feel like this speaker is just as dynamic and has other things going for it, like the nuance, imaging, the phase coherency, and the overall soundstage, the depth. It has the benefits of a stand mount speaker while exhibiting low enough frequency that if you really wanted even more dynamic swing, you could add a subwoofer to it and you would get that. But I feel like this speaker has a lot more going for it than some floor standing speakers I've heard, even in the $20,000 category. Overall, the sound signature of the speaker is pretty neutral, and that may be because TAD used to only sell to the pro audio world, but not long ago, only a few years back, they decided to sell to the consumer world, and their speakers are very expensive and very high-end. Initially, I was a little bit worried that the sound would be too neutral and too boring, but upon hearing this speaker for the first time and onwards in many different situations, I found that this speaker is anything but boring. The speaker is exciting, it's engaging, it's emotional, it is neutral and balanced, and it measures perfectly great, but it still sounds darn good. Attention to sound staging and the overall production, the accuracy was definitely something that they considered when making the speaker. I can definitely tell that there's a high degree of accuracy in the high frequencies. It's not bright nor rolled off in any way or fashion, in my opinion. They just sound pretty darn neutral and balanced to my ears in my room. In fact, when I play really good recordings, these really portray really well what those recordings are all about, in my opinion. And sometimes I'm just flabbergasted because it sounds the best I've ever heard those recordings sound. However, when I play poor recordings, that's what really got me. And yes, I had to bring out the Aerosmith. So I have the Aerosmith here. I have some other recordings here that I play, mostly Korean recordings that are poorly recorded. And I try them on other speakers. And usually transparent speakers that are very revealing, like the TAD speakers, usually destroy poor recordings. It's almost unlistenable. And that's a common theme with high-end speakers. Hence why I'm calling the TADs anti-high-end speakers, is because somehow it seems to be using all of its advantages, the transparency, the sound staging, the depth, and it's somehow making poor recordings sound better. And that's something very impressive, because usually high-end speakers don't do that. They reveal everything that's wrong with the recording. I do hear stuff that is wrong with the recording, but it's not unpleasant or unlistenable. It doesn't rip it to shreds. The TAD simply seems to, like I said, use its advantages and actually makes the recording sound good. You know, a 10 out of 10 in terms of practicality for me, because I don't always play, beautiful recordings. I play sometimes music that I like that is poorly recorded. This speaker portrays instruments extremely well, and the contrast between the instruments are extremely great as well. The speaker itself seems to have really low noise floor because it portrays perfect blackness when it comes to music. It's much like OLED TV for speakers. And actually, one of my favorite musicians of all time actually said one time, quiet parts of the music is just as important as the loud parts. And I have to agree, this speaker really has that going for it. When it needs to be quiet, it is very quiet and has those microdynamics going for it. The macrodynamics with big dynamic swings and big explosions are extremely good with the speaker as well. And all while being very accurate with the instrument reproduction, guitar, saxophone, trumpet, every music that I play and instrument I throw out this speaker, it's able to play extremely well. Even piano sounds realistic to me on the speaker, which I find to be one of the most hardest instruments to recreate more convincingly with a speaker system. But as you listen to this speaker for long periods of time, the thing that you notice and differentiates this speaker from every other speaker is the layering aspect. It adds to that contrast aspect as well, but of course there's soundstage depth to be had behind the speakers. But this speaker is very good at portraying layering from where the speakers are to you, the listener. So everything that is happening between you and the speaker, you're hearing very, very well. And it's not just a 2D image in front of you, but you can hear things to the side, to the behind of your head. And when you play right recordings, you will get some really freaky stuff going. In fact, I had a friend that came in here and heard these speakers and was looking around like this. And he was like, do you have surrounds? Do you have surround speakers? Because this can't be just these two speakers. And I said, nope. Just those two speakers, man. And yes, at times you can have less expensive speakers do that. For example, the KLH Model 5 with the Dana-Fripp Stallo. I'll link to that video in the description if you haven't watched it. But those combination with the right amplifier pairing and in right conditions, it does do that surround thing where it's kind of like freaky because it's coming from the side, from behind you, like a surround sound. However, I have to say this is not something that I've seen a lot of speakers do in the $2,000 to $3,000 price category, and something that this speaker is just simply much better at and seamless at doing it as well. Yes, these speakers do sound better and they do scale, for example, with something like my Luxman M900U. However, it doesn't seem to absolutely require it to sound good. In fact, it sounds perfectly amazing and shows you all the capabilities of the speaker just as good with a receiver, and it's just less finicky with amplification. I have tried it with the Onkyo receiver here, but I also tried it with a few other receivers like the Denon receiver I have upstairs. And it sounds pretty magnificent. I mean, the speakers sound really, really good even with a receiver. And they're actually pretty easy to drive. They are rated for 85 dB in sensitivity. And even though they're 4-ohm speakers, for some reason, perhaps because the impedance curve is very linear and easy to drive for the most part, it doesn't seem like it needs a lot of power to really shine, in my opinion. Unlike many of the higher end speakers that I've tried in the past that just wouldn't sound good with a receiver. Ugh, what is this receiver? I refuse to sound good until I receive something better. Pure power, more pure. Bring me the pure blood. In fact, I've tried it with other components, of course, like the Gato or Gato monoblocks I have here, beautiful units, and they sound really, really good, the monoblocks on each side. And they seem to really add the detail aspect to the speakers, as well as add some warmth to it. And the bass response is really, really impressive with it. But I haven't heard these speakers sound bad with any of these components, which is impressive. The Otto IN200 SE in the middle is really a really nice unit I just reviewed for Soundstage. And it's really known for that contrastiness and really being able to portray those instruments really well. And the speakers really take that to its advantage and sound really magnificent with it. I think that was perhaps one of my favorite pairings. I also tried it with the Hego H30A flagship amplifier, and that was the best pairing, but in terms of price differences, I think the Otto is really impressive in terms of really giving you that wow factor with these speakers. And also I tried it with the Wilsonton 300B tube amplifier, and really again it portrays the tube technology really well, and it doesn't really seem to rip it apart and show everything that's bad about the unit, but rather what's good about the tube units. More holographic soundstage, nuance, detail, airiness, and the bass may be a little bit less satisfying than some solid state options here, but nevertheless still really fun to listen to. Of course, I have some hybrid ones from Vincent Audio, and this is a one that's upcoming soon, so I won't spoil it too much, but also it sounded really, really good. Had that bass punch and airiness and that typical tube hybrid balance there, but it's a pretty expensive unit, and I would say it would be my third favorite. I still thought the Otto sounded the second best with the speakers. Hego H30A being the first, of course, but the price is ridiculous on that one. And then here we have the Denafrips Thallo, which is one of my references, and that one sounded pretty okay, pretty neutral. I don't really have complaints, but it didn't really stand out to me when I tried it with all these other components. I think the Otto really stood out with these speakers. It just simply checks off a lot of lists for me, and that's why I think this high-end speaker deserves this price tag, because it's not amp finicky, it's not placement sensitive, it's easy to work with, it is coherent, accurate, while being musical at the same time and not destroying poor recordings. What more can I ask for? It goes down to 30 Hertz, which is a plus in my room, pressurizes just like a floor stander. It's beautiful looking. Now the looks, I have to admit, it is a hit or miss for a lot of people. I think they only have a piano black finish and the silver titanium finish I have here, but I like the looks personally speaking. I really like the stands. The stands are pretty neat. So I have the isoacoustic feet instead of the spikes on here, highly recommended. But also the stand itself is very, very beautiful, and it actually bolts on to the cabinet itself so that it's very sturdy and it doesn't fall off. Aside from that, another surprise is that the TAD company is actually a luxury pro audio branch off of Pioneer. So they definitely have the economy of scale, and they definitely know what they're doing. They've been designing speakers for a long, long time. This is not some boutique little company that's done in a garage. So there's that. And I'm definitely loving this speaker. I hope that you guys get a chance to hear it as well. And thank you for staying and hearing my audio journey and audiophile story in my system. And I hope to see you guys more. So definitely subscribe and click that like button. Definitely helps me out big time. And I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace.